Ladies and gents, check the time on the wall or the clock in the hall. It's time for an alternative paper review for you all. God, I hate myself. First up to Boris Johnson's old employer and spiritual home, the Daily Telegraph, who are saying Tories face 1997-style wipeout. And it's weird, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to go into my entire list of proclivities, but I will say this. I never expected to go from flaccid to half-mast at 9 a.m. off the back of the content provided by a right-wing broadsheet. But it's funny how things turn out. I'm wasting no time to illustrate the urgent need to ensure that even nice fluffy charities like Eton College should be required to offer a refund where appropriate. Expensively educated Zach Goldsmith was straight out the gate last night, ignoring the last 4 years of political history to say thank God for those clever-clogged Tory grandees who got rid of Boris. They dodged a bullet there, didn't they? Genius! And you see this quite a lot with a certain subset of Conservative MPs and Lords and sort of hangers-on. It's this idea that because Boris Johnson won that 2019 80-seat majority, because he was seen as a vote winner, then had he not been ejected from power, then as we approach this next general election, they would be on course to brighter days, to sunnier uplands. But of course that completely ignores the three-pronged approach of steadfast cretiny that was the Johnson premiership, where he tried to get Owen Paterson off by disbanding the Standards Committee. That cost him the pollie. They went 8 points down. Then there was Partygate. Then there was Chris Pincher. And of course the whole thing climaxed with 50 of his own MPs and civil service staff all uniting, including the Chancellor, to say, yeah, you gotta clear off, mate. Like, it was Boris Johnson who cost the Conservatives Boris Johnson's poll lead. Like, stop looking at things through rose tints, Zach Goldsmith and all of your ilk. Looking back at the Johnson premiership like, oh, well, we were only 8 points behind then. We should bring back Boris because we were only 8 points behind. That is like inviting the arsonist back to the house fire. Like, can you come and give us a hand with the house fire? Because the flames were only around the kitchen when you left. Now, to me, this sort of reaction is actually quite revealing because it's typical of the Tories to obsess over the polls and the election for the sake of the polls and the election. You know, I don't suppose any of us really want to hear this, but they could still turn all of this around if they announced a wartime house-building effort, if they announced an initiative to rejoin the European Union, if they fully socialised childcare, if they governed in the interest of the broader public. But here's the problem. They don't want to do any of that. What they actually want is to carry on business as usual, selling policy to billionaires, have that whole donor whip CCHQ structure continue as is. And what they actually need is a superficial billboard face to cover that will allow them to keep doing so. You know, like, oh, what's that? You want 40 new hospitals? Absolutely, yeah, we could do that. Or an oven-ready Brexit deal, perhaps. How about a ready-to-go social care policy? All of it. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You just put your X in the box right there and we'll get right. I mean, we'll fail on all of it, but it'll get us in office for another 4.5 years so we can continue to loot the public purse. Over to the Mail now. Queen's fury over naming of baby Lilibet. Do you think this is true? Do you honestly think... Is it, like, I mean, this is quite obviously... Like, last week was a bad week for Prince Andrew, right? The week before, also a bad week for Prince Andrew. It is not good for Buckingham Palace to have Prince Andrew's name back out in the news, talking about Epstein, talking about teenage masseuses they paid 12 million to. All of that is very bad coverage, but they can't immediately put a thing out about Meghan. No, that would be too obvious. So what they do is they wait a week, 2 weeks, and now, front cover of the Mail, Queen's fury at Meghan. Aide says monarch was as angry as I'd ever seen her. Really? As angry as you'd ever seen her? Angrier than when it turned out that Prince Andrew was having weird masseuse sex sessions with a teenager who had been trafficked. Angrier than that, really? Oh, yeah, she was livid, so she was. I mean, look, guys, the baby was the baby, right? And then they decided to call it Lilibet, and, you know, the Queen apparently, reportedly, wasn't happy. Nobody likes a bad rebrand, do they? But if you are as upset by the naming of a child as the raping of one, I would playfully suggest that your pomp and status may have seen you fall behind on public attitudes. A lot of people say the modern royal family is so detached, so rich, so out of touch, that they've grown to be morally repugnant. And I don't know if you could ask for a clearer example of that than one where the institutional matriarch seems to think these two things are as bad as each other. You know, child molestation, naming something incorrectly. Like, imagine back in the day, the Queen walks in the room and sees Andrew getting a hand job from a teenage masseuse.
Andrew, what are you doing? She's only 16, for goodness sake.
But Andrew stood next to Charles, and he's like, well, what about Charles? He just called Zimbabwe Rhodesia. And the Queen's like, well, you are both in a lot of trouble. Guys, that's it for this one. Make sure you're liked and subscribed and all that stuff. And if you're in a position to, do tap the join button here on YouTube.